Imagine your neighbor, right? Like the guy you grew up with, the one whose family had dinner with yours.
Yeah, somebody you've known your whole life.
Exactly. Now imagine he sets up this wooden booth right at the end of your street, and every single time you drive to work, he forces you to empty your wallet.
And it's not for, like, a community fund or anything.
No, it's to line his own pockets. And even worse, to fund a foreign military that is actively occupying your town.
Which is just, I mean, horrifying to think about.
Right, and if you refuse to pay him, the soldier standing right behind his booth will drag you away, or, worse.
It's a completely terrifying reality.
It really is. That is the visceral, everyday reality of Capernaum in the first century. And that neighbor who was extorting everyone, that is exactly the person Jesus chose to be his right-hand man in the texts we are looking at today.
Which is just wild when you really think about it.
It's crazy. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today for you, our listener, is to take a stack of notes we've gathered on a very specific ancient text, Matthew chapter 9, and we are going to unpack it.
Yeah. And not just as a religious document either.
Right, but as an explosive historical flashpoint. This is a story filled with intense political tension, deep social betrayal, and massive power struggles.
It really has everything.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when you read this chapter on a surface level, it's really easy to just see a list of magical events and, well, completely miss the ticking bomb sitting underneath.
Yeah, if we take a 30,000-foot view of these sources, Matthew chapter 9 is a profound turning point. I mean, it's often taught as a rapid succession of miraculous healings.
Which, to be fair, is true.
It is true, but that ignores the political subtext. This chapter marks the very first crystallization of organized opposition against Jesus.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, we're looking at the exact moment where the political and religious establishment realizes they don't just have, like, a rogue teacher on their hands.
Right, they have a massive existential threat to their entire social order. To really understand how that conflict ignites, we have to understand the turf where this power struggle is actually taking place.
Yeah.
The fragile ground they're all standing on.
Yeah, we are talking about Capernaum.
Right, and Capernaum is
fascinating because it's not the sleepy, isolated little fishing village that people often picture.
No, not at all.
It was a bustling city sitting right on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, and it served as Jesus' ministry headquarters.
Geographically, it sat directly on a major international trade route, right? The
Yeah.
Way of the Sea.
Yes, exactly.
Our sources highlight this route as the main artery connecting Egypt all the way up through the Levant to Damascus. We're talking about massive caravans, merchants, exotic goods.
There's constant traffic moving to the city center every single day.
Right. And whenever you have a major international trade route, you have a massive influx of wealth.
Oh, yeah. Because of all that traffic moving between empires, Capernaum functioned as a crucial customs checkpoint.
So goods are flowing through, which means taxes are being collected at a high volume.
Exactly. And where lucrative taxes are collected, military power is strictly enforced.
So let's map out that political structure, because it's not a simple monarchy. It's a very messy, layered hierarchy. Rome is the muscle at the very top.
Yeah, Rome maintains ultimate unyielding authority. They don't govern by consensus. They govern through the looming threat of violence.
With military garrisons stationed strategically throughout the region.
Right. However, they didn't want to manage every local dispute. So they delegated the day-to-day governance of the Galilee region to a local proxy ruler.
A guy named Herod Antipas.
Exactly.
So Rome is the mafia boss, and Herod Antipas is like the middle manager whose entire survival depends on keeping the boss happy and the money flowing upward.
That's a great way to put it. And underneath Herod, you have the local Jewish leaders. This creates a deeply fragile, complex environment for them.
They're caught in a vice, basically.
Completely. On one hand, they are desperately trying to retain their own religious and community influence and, keep their cultural identity intact.
Yeah.
On the other hand, they had to navigate this Roman overlordship that could crush their entire society at any second if things get out of hand.
It's like they're walking a tightrope during a hurricane. One wrong step, one riot in the streets, one unchecked rebel who gets a little too popular.
And Rome doesn't send negotiators.
Right. They send legions to bring the military hammer down on the entire community.
The local leaders are terrified of anything that might rock the boat.
So because of that suffocating pressure, certain everyday things become massive cultural flashpoints.
Yeah, and the local customs booth in Capernaum is the perfect example of that.
It wasn't just a toll road or a mild inconvenience for the merchants.
No, it was the most visceral daily symbol of an oppressive political climate.
Because it's where the occupation literally reaches into your livelihood and takes the food off your table.
Exactly. And this brings us to a key figure in this chapter.
Matthew.
Yes. The sources tell us Matthew was a Jewish tax collector, sitting right there at the Capernaum customs booth.
He was extracting duties from his own people.
Right, he reported to Herod Antipas, but he did so with the implicit threat of Roman military force backing him up.
Let me stop you there, though. How did this tax collection actually work? Because, I mean, it wasn't like modern income tax.
Not at all. The ancient system of tax farming was inherently corrupt by design. It actually incentivized the collectors to legally extort the populace.
Wait, how?
Well, Herod in Rome would give a tax collector a specific quota for a region, right?
Okay.
And whatever the collector extracted over that quota, they were legally allowed to keep as personal profit.
Oh, wow. So it's basically a state-sponsored mafia franchise.
Pretty much.
Rome says, give us 1,000,000 denarii, and Herod tells Matthew, get me the 1,000,000 plus my cut, and whatever you can squeeze out of your neighbors on top of that is yours to keep.
That is the exact mechanism. They were squeezing their own neighbors dry, backed by Roman swords.
That's brutal.
It is. To the Jewish community, tax collectors were the ultimate traitors. Choosing to collaborate with the occupying power made a person an immediate social outcast.
The social cost was absolute and devastating. What does that actually look like for someone living in a communal ancient society?
Well, if you took this job, you were formally excommunicated from the synagogue.
Wow.
And in the first century, the synagogue wasn't just a place of worship, It was the town hall, the welfare system, the center of social life.
You lose everything.
Everything. You were disqualified from serving as a witness or a judge in any legal proceeding, meaning your word meant nothing under the law.
Unbelievable.
You couldn't participate in community commerce safely, and you brought immense, lasting disgrace upon your entire extended family. You were effectively a ghost to your own people.
So, to the local Jewish population, this guy isn't just a strict IRS agent.
No.
He's a local who sold out to join an occupying mob. He is the face of their oppression.
Exactly.
And yet, the source text says Jesus walks right up to the customs booth and calls Matthew to follow him. He welcomes the most despised political collaborator into his inner circle.
The shock value of that is completely off the chart.
It really is.
The scandal of that moment cannot be overstated. But welcoming Matthew to walk with him is just the opening move.
Right.
What Jesus does next creates a social earthquake that directly threatens the religious elite.
Here's where it gets really interesting. After calling Matthew, the text says Jesus attends a meal. He goes to a dinner party at Matthew's house.
Yeah, and the guest list is a public relations nightmare.
The sources say he is eating with a large group of, quote, many tax collectors and sinners.
Which is, well, we have to unpack the cultural weight of a shared meal in the ancient Near East.
Yeah, because in our modern context, grabbing a coffee or a quick bite with someone doesn't mean much.
Right, but in the first century, sharing a meal was a profound, legally and spiritually binding endorsement. It was the ultimate demonstration of social acceptance.
Let's break that down into everyday terms. By sitting at that table, you're essentially saying, your reputation is now tied to mine. We are family. I endorse who you are.
That is the cultural mechanism at play, exactly. By eating with these specific individuals, the extortionists, the traitors, the outcasts, Jesus commits a radical cultural transgression.
Because he is visibly and intentionally violating deeply embedded boundaries of ritual purity.
Yes, and the religious leaders of the day, specifically a group known as the Pharisees, they spent their entire lives enforcing those boundaries.
Let's define the Pharisees for a second. These aren't just like grumpy old men complaining about the youth.
No.
They were essentially the strict religious purity police of the day. They believed that if the Jewish people could just perfectly obey God's laws and remain ritually pure, God would bless them.
And maybe, finally, overthrow the Roman occupation.
Right.
They view themselves as the defenders of the nation's soul. So when they see a prominent rabbi like Jesus sharing a covenant meal with the very people who are bleeding the nation dry.
It sends the Pharisees into a complete tailspin.
Oh, absolutely. They immediately launch a coordinated campaign to destroy his reputation.
And throughout this chapter, they levy 4 very severe accusations against him.
Right. They do. They accuse him of blasphemy. They accuse him of befriending sinners.
Right.
They accuse him of disrespecting their ancient traditions. And eventually, they accuse him of serving Satan.
They throw the entire book at him. And what I find so fascinating in the sources is Jesus' response to this outrage over his dinner guests.
It's brilliant.
He quotes the ancient prophet Hosea. It's Matthew 9, verses 12 and 13. He says, quote, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners."
Yeah.
Why is quoting Hosea such a mic drop moment here?
Because he is using the establishment's own revered ancient prophets to dismantle their current system.
Oh, wow.
That statement, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice," is the core thesis of his ministry. It is a direct, stinging rebuke of the Pharisees' exclusivity.
Because they had built an entire infrastructure based on sacrifice.
Right, on rigid adherence to purity laws that systematically kept broken people out. Jesus is stating, using their own scriptures, that God's primary desire is mercy.
Moving toward the broken, not walling them off behind bureaucratic purity tests.
Exactly.
Wait, I'm confused, though. If the Pharisees are just mad about theology and, bad table manners, why does this escalate to life or death threats later on?
That's a great question.
A disagreement over an ancient text doesn't usually result in a targeted takedown.
To understand why this escalates to a life or death threat, we have to look at what Jesus did next. He started taking away their monopoly on God.
And this brings us to the sheer volume of miracles in this chapter.
Yes.
The pacing of the text here is incredibly fast. Jesus displays this extraordinary authority in rapid succession. First, he heals a paralyzed man.
Yeah.
Then he heals a woman with a chronic bleeding condition, which, by the way, made her ritually impure.
Meaning he was breaking another massive taboo just by being near her.
Right. Then he resurrects a local ruler's deceased daughter. He restores sight to 2 blind men, and he casts out a mute demon.
What's fascinating here is the underlying mechanism of these actions. Think about the supply chain of forgiveness in the first century.
The supply chain of forgiveness. Okay, go on.
If an everyday person wanted their sins forgiven or to be declared ritually clean enough to rejoin society, there's a very specific, highly regulated process.
Right.
He had to travel to the temple, purchase a specific unblemished animal, present it to a priest, and have that priest perform a sacrifice on your behalf.
The religious institutions controlled the entire pipeline.
Exactly. They controlled access to God.
Okay, I see where this is going.
By forgiving sins directly, which he does right at the beginning of the chapter with the paralyzed man, and by offering direct spiritual and physical healing out in the streets, Jesus is completely bypassing their religious infrastructure.
Wow.
He is usurping a prerogative that the temple establishment believed was strictly, exclusively theirs. He is taking their power.
So every time Jesus heals someone in the street or looks at a paralyzed man and says, "Your sins are forgiven," he's proving to the crowds that the religious elite are unnecessary middlemen.
Yes.
He's rendering their entire political and economic system obsolete.
There's a key moment in the text, Matthew 9.4 through 6, that highlights this dynamic perfectly.
What happens?
Well, when Jesus tells the paralyzed man his sins are forgiven, the leaders inwardly accuse him of blasphemy. Jesus perceives their thoughts, and he challenges them.
Right.
He asks, "Why do you entertain evil thoughts in your hearts?" Which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven or to say get up and walk. But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins.
So he heals the man's physical paralysis as tangible, undeniable proof that he actually holds the invisible authority to forgive sins.
Exactly. He's establishing his ultimate authority over both the spiritual and physical realms simultaneously.
Man, as Jesus continually bypasses their system, the lines in the sand become permanent trenches.
They really do. This chapter reveals 2 entirely different ways of looking at the crowds, the regular people trying to survive in Capernaum.
Right. On one side, you have the establishment. The Pharisees see these undeniable miracles of compassion giving sight to the blind, resurrecting a child, and instead of celebrating, they escalate their attacks to the highest possible degree.
Yeah, the sources note that they make their ultimate accusation. They claim Jesus is drawing his power from Satan.
We have to ask why they would look at undeniable healing and call it demonic.
The psychology here is critical. They aren't just cartoon villains, They are terrified men trying to hold on to control.
Right, because if they admit his power is from God, their entire power structure collapses.
Exactly. They are so entrenched in protecting their own authority, their own precarious position with Rome, and their influence over the crowds that they have to rationalize his actions.
Wow.
They would rather attribute a miraculous healing to the devil than yield a single inch of their control over the population.
They'd rather the people stay sick if it means they get to stay in charge.
Yeah.
It's a terrifying level of cognitive dissonance. But then we see the compassionate contrast. How does Jesus react to the crowds?
It's completely different.
There's a quote from Matthew 9.36 in our notes that serves as the emotional anchor of this entire historical deep dive. It says, quote, "When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd."
Yeah, and if we connect this to you, the listener, if we ask why this ancient history matters to us today, this verse is a profound indictment.
How so?
It highlights the total failure of the current religious and political leadership of that time. The people were harassed and helpless because of the systems that were supposed to be guiding them.
The crushing Roman taxes, the Herodian extortion at the toll booths, the Pharisees' rigid, exclusive purity laws.
Exactly.
The so-called shepherds were the ones doing the harassing.
It's a timeless reminder of how systems designed to protect, to govern, or even to provide spiritual guidance can easily become mechanisms of oppression if they lose sight of human mercy.
Yeah.
Jesus' reaction demonstrates that true authority isn't about control, bureaucracy, or exclusion.
Right.
It's demonstrated through deep, active compassion for the vulnerable. He looks at the brokenness caused by these systems and moves toward it, rather than building a wall to keep it out.
It entirely flips the script on what leadership is supposed to look like.
It really does.
The guys with the impressive titles and the pristine robes are destroying the people, and the guy eating dinner with the traitors is the one actually bringing healing and restoration to the community.
Yeah. And as we look at all these sources, it leaves us with something really important to consider about our own modern structures.
Like what?
Well, we talked a lot today about first-century tax collectors extracting wealth backed by the threat of force.
Right.
It makes you wonder, who are the modern tax collectors in our digital age? What invisible tolls are we paying every single day just to participate in modern society? And who is holding the metaphorical swords to back it up?
Wow, yeah. Are the systems we rely on today shepherding us, or are they leaving us harassed and helpless?
Exactly. That's a lot to think about.
So, what does this all mean? We've looked at the intense geopolitics of Capernaum, the tightrope walk of the local leaders terrified of Rome, the absolute scandal of the tax collector, and the sheer threat of Jesus' compassion bypassing the entire establishment.
It's a massive power struggle.
It is. But we really want to hear from you. Drop a comment below right now with your thoughts on today's historical drama and the intense power struggles of first-century Capernaum.
Yeah, did the reality of the tax farming system or the hidden politics behind these miracles surprise you?
Let us know in the comments. And hey, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoyed today's deep dive and you want to keep learning and unpacking these incredible historical texts with us.
Also, check out the links we added.
Oh, absolutely. Make sure to check the description below for exclusive links we've put together just for you. You will not want to miss our next deep dive into our sources because, trust me, the conflict we uncovered today, the next one is going to be even more intense. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.